Hello, what is up? Welcome to the weekly Race Brain Hyrox show, coming to you from the mecca of hybrid racing currently, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've got my Bucks hat on, and today, a very special guest, a friend of mine. We don't train together, but we do train at the same gym sometimes. You may know him as Raw Dog, and if you're Matt B. Davis, you hate that name, and we might get into that later. Please welcome to the show, Dawson Miller. What's up, Dawson?
Hey Matt, how's it going? We might have to do a little more in the Hyrox world before we're called the Mecca. We're still on the way up, but
Hey,
as the
this is currently right now the Race Brain Hyrox show is currently my show, so it's my rules. So if people don't like it, well, they can just they can get over it.
well, that works for you.
No,
Then anything
you're right
anything you
though.
say is 100% correct.
No, you're right. You're right. We need to get some more results before we go out there claiming the Mecca. But it is funny. It is funny. How's it going, man? How you been?
Good. Just kind of in between races right now. Just trainings at a lighter level, but work is good. Training's going decent. Can't really complain, and yeah, just kind of gearing up for my next race in a few months. So nothing too pressing right now. I mean, Hyrox is really, all we ever talk about. So you asked me how I'm going, and that's the first thing I mentioned. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of the new thing in our group is that we go around and tell everybody about Hyrox and can't stop talking about it. So this is a perfect outlet for me.
I'm pretty sure that Dawson and I are in a fairly large fitness community here in Milwaukee that is got spider webs out into several other communities in Milwaukee, and I'm pretty sure they're tired of us and Hyrox chatter at this point. So he is correct. This is the perfect outlet. I'm going to give you a quick introduction, just so people may not know, because you're a name that some people may not be familiar with. If you listen to the Race Brain show, you've heard your name pop up or a little bit over the last year. But Dawson actually just recently went up to Toronto, finished second behind Debo, Marcus Wallace himself. What was it? 6 seconds, 7 seconds?
I don't know the official, but he was under 58 and I was over 58, so that's all that matters for the headline.
Yeah. So you were 58.04. I think he was at 57 high. So I believe you guys were within 10 seconds. Prior to that, you qualified for Worlds in Nice last year. You finished 11th overall, I believe top 5 in your age group with a 1 hour and 42-second time. Before that, your only other pro race was Houston of last year, where you ran a 61:34. Very strong debut race. And your actual first debut Hyrox race was a men's open in Chicago of last year. So coming up on the 1-year anniversary of your first race, where you ran a blazing 59:53, took second to Paul Fitzpatrick, Fly with Fitz on Instagram. So definitely someone who is looking to break in this year to the Elite 15. If you've listened to the show, you also know that Dawson is going to be pairing up with Debo. They're going to run and make a crack at the Elite 15 doubles. So that's kind of Dawson's background. But I'm curious, Dawson. We've mentioned this before on the show, but why don't you tell the listeners or the viewers on YouTube, give us a little bit of a background on your athletic background, because you did some cool stuff in college.
Yeah, so I grew up just doing all the typical small town sports, played football, soccer, basketball, ran track in middle school. Then in high school, 3-sport athlete. Again, small town, you need as many bodies as you can in every single sport. So I was soccer, basketball, track. Had some success in track after I finally hit a growth spurt my junior year of high school. Grew about 5 inches in a summer. So started to see some athletic ability come out then.
So you're saying that's why I'm not good at Hyrox, because I'm 5'9"?
That is up for debate, but it might help. It could help. But yeah, had some success in track. My dad is a cross country coach at UW Whitewater. He did not recruit me. The track coach recruited me for my 800 and mile ability that I had in high school.
Do people want to know what was your 800 and mile time in high school, and was it better than BK?
No, BK crushed me in the 800. I was 158 in high school, and I think I was like 426 in the mile. So not, stellar times, but enough to get some attention at the D3 level. So I ended up choosing to run at Whitewater, ran for my dad cross country, and then ran track as well. Much more of a track runner than a cross country runner, being a taller distance runner. The shorter distances kind of helped me out with that. Found some success in the steeplechase at a young, well, in my freshman year, and then ended up becoming a national champion in the steeplechase by my senior year. If you want times, 800, I think is 155, mile 410, 3K is 917, maybe. No, sorry, 817. I can't even say 817.
Say
5K
by your own standards, 917 wouldn't be very good for the 3K.
5K 15:27, 8K cross country, which time doesn't matter in cross country. I think it was like 24:50. So just about like
what was the college? What was college cross country? Was it an 8K or a 10K?
It's an 8K for D3. For D2 and D1, it's 10K at the national meet, but they run 8Ks all the time during the year, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, and then ran a year after college, was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials, was 23rd, I think was my peak as a US citizen trying to qualify for the Olympic trials. Tore my Achilles, not fully, but partially torn. Was dealing with an injury through training, ended up giving up on the running career, went back and got my MBA, and have lived in Milwaukee ever since. That was about 8 years ago. So now I stopped running 8 years ago, moved to Milwaukee 6 years ago. So have just now gotten back into running and fitness again. And I'm starting to enjoy it again, which at the end of my career, I was not enjoying it at all with the injury that I had.
Yeah, I think it's a common refrain for college athletes whose careers get ended by injuries. You kind of walk away from sport for a while. So we don't need to go through the full genesis of how we got to Hyrox, but I do think it is worth bringing up, given that we've got Raw Dog on the screen. True or false? The nickname Raw Dog came from University of Wisconsin Whitewater.
False. It was from high school, actually. So it's
high school. Okay.
Yeah, it's a nickname that your friends give you, and it sticks. Usually, you don't choose your own nickname, but all my high school and college friends have referred to me as that for a long time.
Yeah, if you want to follow Dawson on Instagram, it is Raw Dog Mills _II or 2. I guess if you wanted to be correct. Is it the second, because is that what do they call Jeff Raw Dog as well?
So our license plate of our minivan that my parents owned for about 15 years was MILS _II, Mills 2, because we also had a MILS license plate, and my friends referred to it as the Mills Deuce because by the end of its life, it was not a very good car. So it was a piece of crap. So the Mills Deuce. So it's an homage to the minivan that I drove around in high school.
High school boys are undefeated in nicknames. It is absolutely hilarious that your nickname and Instagram handle comes from a joke with your buddies when you were 16 or 17 and now still plays when you're in your early 30s. That's amazing. Well, that's that thing. I feel like that's helpful background. So I would call you an elite runner, having had plenty of Miller Lights with you. I know that you would not classify yourself as an elite runner. If you want to be humbled in your running abilities, just spend any amount of time with Dawson and he will remind you of what is good and what is not good. And he would quantify himself as an average runner at best. But I guess I am curious, like, what were you doing athletically right before Hyrox, or were you doing anything athletically, or was it just an opportunity to get back into sport, get back into competition?
Yeah, so in between, I really wasn't doing much. I mean, after I stopped running post Achilles surgery, Just kind of went through the normal like 9 to 12 month process of getting that better, and then just found the gym, like lifting weights is just something to do that was active, that didn't involve running, and then just kind of playing random basketball games, soccer games, just stuff I did and enjoyed before my running career. Because during running, as in like elite Hyrox athletes, realize you can't do a lot of the normal hobby activity things if you want to perform at an elite level. So you can kind of give those up for risk of injury. So I just started doing a lot of the stuff that I couldn't do while training for running, which was still active, but no real structure or anything, just kind of getting my PRs and the simple lifts up over time, but no real direction. And then when I decided I wanted to start training for Hyrox, that's when I really started to follow a program again and just kind of designed my own program for me, just over my experience that I had in the past.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you signed up for Chicago of 2023, did you do a lot of Hyrox training? Because I actually don't know the answer to this. Did you do a lot of Hyrox training leading into that, or were you just doing more of the general fitness? You had an elite level running background that would then lend itself to a strong performance in Chicago. Like, were you dialed in on the training for Hyrox at that point in time, or were you just kind of doing your own thing and then found the success?
No, I'd say from when I decided I wanted to do one to when it actually happened, I probably had about 6 months worth of time that I would say was focused workouts. Now, again, this I've always just designed my own workouts and done kind of coached myself. So it's not, I look back at the stuff that I was doing then and it's kind of ridiculous. But I've always been a proponent of not overdoing things. If anything, I've always been undertrained. Bigger guy in the distance running world, always did lower mileage than a lot of my competitors. Just kind of always would rather be ready for an event at any time than be dealing with an injury or to be so overworked that you can't perform. Just the way the college structure works is you have a lot of base work going into a season. And then in that season, you're racing, every single week. So in cross country, it's every other weekend. And in track, you have an indoor and outdoor season. That's every weekend for 8 weeks straight, you're racing. So just having the training style so that you're ready to perform at a high level over an extended period of time is beneficial in that. So that's just kind of what I fell back on is, getting in quality work, but not necessarily doing overworking or I guess always being ready to race.
Yeah. So that's actually something that I am curious, just because I feel like I can have a conversation with you about this, because I do talk to you every day, and I do kind of know a little bit of what you're doing for training. You definitely have a little bit of a different approach. I feel like right now in hybrid and especially in Hyrox, like there's a heavy emphasis on zone 2, building up a big aerobic base, logging, I'd say a decent amount of zone 2 miles, probably minimum 20 to 30 a week, maybe cut that down to 15. It seems like that's what a lot of people do. Now, having spent as much time with you as I have, like, you actually, now, whether it's just like kind of the background that you come from or protecting that calf of yours, you actually don't do a ton of zone 2 running, correct? Like, you're like, if I go look up your Strava right now, like, you actually don't put in a ton of miles, relatively speaking, which I guess I'm just curious, like, why you think that works for you and what do you do? Because, it's not like I mean, yes, you have an elite level running background, but if I heard you right, you took several years off from doing that. So you would think there'd be some degradation of fitness, but you just recently ran a 440-mile, very hungover. Um, so you still have that ability to get going. So I guess, like, there's two parts there. What do you think? Is that true that you're not logging a ton of miles? And then secondarily, how are you building that aerobic base?
Yeah, so in the last year, basically, so since Chicago last year, I think my highest mileage week has been like 22 or 23 miles, and that was actually just this last week, and then maybe one or two sprinkled in. But
And that was
a
doing a
lot of it,
10-mile run with a friend too. So it took a 10-mile run to get him up over 20 miles.
yeah, and that's changing now. I'm trying to going forward, at least over the next month and a half. I'm trying to increase just my running mileage in general, but a lot of it was from necessity. So with my Achilles injury, the way that it happened, it was more from an overuse than it was a sudden impact. So uh, every step that I take would make it. It would essentially, my heel bone was rubbing into my Achilles, and so every step that you take, your heel bone's rubbing into your Achilles. So the less steps you take, the less damage you have done to it. So uh kind of my whole mindset is, all right, if I do quality miles versus many miles, I'll still get a benefit without the increase of re-injuring my Achilles. But in college I was the same way, so we kind of like laugh at paces now, but I used to train at like 6:30, 6:40 pace on an easy run every single day. I'd be running every single day, 60 65 miles a week, and I'd be running, my slowest miles would be 6:40 pace. And that was just where I felt comfortable, where I felt my perceived effort was an easy day. And so when I get back into running, I'm not out there like plopping miles because it's not what I'm used to. I try to find a similar stride length to what I used to do. I try to feel the way I used to feel when I ran. And because easy days for me were at that pace, it's hard for me to run slow zone 2 miles. I'd rather do zone 2 work on another piece of equipment, which, I have an Elliptigo. We can get into that later. I use that for my training. But when I'm running, I don't tend to like to uh, run, I guess, junk miles or just plop around miles. And that's just how I've always been. It's not something that I think is necessarily conducive for Hyrox. It's conducive for me. So that's how I've always been and how I will always train. But yeah, even right now, I'm in far less running shape than what I used to be. And I think my slowest miles when I'm comfortable are like 7:20 pace. I don't like to run much slower than that. Obviously, after a workout, when I'm doing a cool down, I'll be plopping around for 10 minutes to just shake the legs out. But on a legitimate run, when I'm just out there running, I don't enjoy running slow. So that's just a personal preference. But that was kind of the genesis of it. Was not only is that how I used to train, but it also is a little more conducive for the injuries that I've sustained.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's smart too. I think the main takeaway that I take out of that is what works for some doesn't work for everybody. Knowing your body is just as important as following a program. And, you do have that background that you can fall back on. Dawson is someone who, if you watch him run, has nearly perfect running mechanics and is like a metronome. Doesn't even need to look at his watch, knows how fast he's running. I did a 5K test over the summer and asked Dawson to pull me along. And when we finished, I said, "What do you think that was?" And he just like said it without even looking at his watch. It's pretty crazy. So that's interesting. And you talked about the elliptigo. So I'm gonna have to pull this up because I don't know that most people would even know what an elliptigo is. It's effectively a bike.
I can try
Like
to
a
explain it as you pull it up.
Yeah, go for it.
So essentially, it was designed by elite runners who wanted to get muscle running conducive zone 2 work. Sitting on a bike hunched over is not good for your core. It doesn't use a lot of your running muscles. It's actually not bad for Hyrox because you're using a lot of quad, but it's not actually good for running mechanics. So they designed an elliptical that you can take outside and ride it like a normal bike. You're standing up. When I'm on it, I'm like 8 feet tall, and the the pedals are on a sled, and then the gear is behind you. So when you're pedaling, the gear isn't under you like a bike; it's behind you. So you're actually able to move up and down and forward and backwards at the same time on that angle, and your ankle is moving at the same time. So you are getting good calf and ankle mobility while you're on it. And it's a good alternative for people cross training. And a lot of elite runners use it to cross train. It got popular about 10 years ago. People were actually doing Elliptigo races. It didn't take off as much as they thought it would, but there was actually competitive Elliptigo races at one point. But yeah, I use it just as my easy days. I like to go like 90 minutes, 2 hours on it. This is where if it's windy, you can get up above zone 2, but if it's not very windy, you can just chill at zone 2 for about 2 hours. And you're outside, and it's much better than being confined to indoors. So I love it for that aspect. My dad, who I had mentioned is a cross country coach, he has 5 of them for his athletes, and they actually put them on trainers. So you take a device that was made indoors, you make it on wheels, and so that it's available to go outdoors, and then he goes and puts it on a trainer, and then so his athletes can be on the track with all their friends still participating in practice on these ellipticos on trainers. It's kind of ass backwards, but it's still a pretty good workout.
Jeff Miller, absolute legend. Yeah, it's almost a guarantee that if it's a beautiful Sunday in Milwaukee, Raw Dog Mills is probably logging 30 miles on this bad boy. So it's not just the elliptigo though. I've also actually seen you do at least a handful of times, if I'm not mistaken. You've done effectively a Hyrox race, but you've subbed out the running for the Echo bike, not to be mistaken with the assault bike. The Echo bike, where you try to hold a certain amount of watts, which I think is, interesting as well. And there's some other people that, in this space that have kind of done something similar. I guess, what is kind of your method behind that? Or, obviously it's worked for you because if I remember correctly, leading up to Toronto, you weren't actually sure how the performance would go because you weren't logging a lot of miles because that calf was, or an Achilles was being kind of pesky.
Yeah, so that one that you saw in person was simply just because I could not run at the time. It was at the point in my injury where I was able to do a lot of the workouts, but I couldn't trust just hitting my foot on the ground thousands of times and not having something happen to my calf. So I do it a lot with ergs too, just in either AMRAPs or EMOMs. I just like to have the effective work of to mimic running, but not actually have the pounding of running. Whenever I do, like I said, whenever I have a running focused workout, I like to make that the priority. So I don't really like to put running in workouts where it's not the priority. So if there is a situation like that, I'll sub it out for an erg or an echo bike. And I do not recommend doing the echo bike for a sim because your grip strength is just completely gone. Like it is just, your upper body is just destroyed for the entire workout. And so that was probably a one and done on that one that you saw, but that was just out of necessity at the time, not I guess planned.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of leads me to another question. Like, what would you say? I'm not going to ask you what your why is. That feels kind of lame for a Hyrox podcast, but I am curious, like, what drives you? Because for it to be a running race, and you have battled this calf Achilles injury for a long time. Not, I mean, this predates itself to Hyrox, and like I guess everyone's different, but like for me personally, there is nothing that feels more boring and grindy than sitting on an echo bike or sitting on a ski erg or sitting on a rower. It just doesn't have the same type of like excitement that pounding pavement or running does. Like, so that's, and you're trying to break in to, I mean, this is fair to say, like, you are trying to break into the Elite 15. Like you will most likely, depending on who shows up, you'll most likely have a pretty good shot with the Elite 15 doubles. But if not this year, maybe next year. Like you're trying to get in that Elite 15 race, and running is such a big part of that. And it's also kind of your strength, and you haven't been able to do it a ton. So where do you find that like drive or motivation to continue to go after something where such a big part of it, and probably your biggest asset is, I don't want to say, well, I guess hampered, so to speak.
Yeah, and I definitely through the entire process, I mean, I look at everything long term. So even when I did Chicago in the open and just kind of going through it, I just wanted to see kind of where my ability was at for everything else. So obviously having a running background, I know that I can improve my running over time. But with all the time off that I took, I'm not just trying to jump right back into it and re-injure myself, which, as you know, I've now strained my calf twice. So it's like I'm pushing kind of the envelope, I think, for myself on the running side as much as I should without it being a detriment to everything. So kind of like I said earlier, I'd rather be available at all times and be a little undertrained than to be overtrained and completely out of a race. Especially because, especially in the U.S., I mean, we're traveling for all these races. It's a commitment. So uh, being overtrained and having a bad race is not really a monetary savvy option. Rather be ready to go, fully healthy, a little undertrained, and still fall back on, I guess, my running ability than to be overtrained and out of commission is kind of the moral of my training.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. So let's dig into your races. So as I mentioned, you broke that you broke that hour mark in your very first Hyrox. It wasn't open, however, still coming in sub 60. Again, especially in the US, we don't necessarily see a ton of sub 60 times. I can't remember which course it was this weekend that had 17 guys under sub 60. That doesn't happen in the state. So that was impressive. But you actually qualified for Worlds out of that race. You did one more. You did Houston. You took second overall in Houston with the 61. And then you didn't race again until Nice, partially because of where we were at in the season and partially because of, of that calf. Nice, you had a very strong race. I had the privilege of watching it live. And you were flying. At one point, you were in the lead. Not to not to go back and rub it in. You were in the lead, and then you kind of came undone a little bit on wall balls, and then you didn't race again for 2.5 months. And you came back in this Toronto race, and obviously, you and Marcus were battling, so that was nice. You had someone else kind of going for the same kind of goal that you have, and someone that you've trained with, and that that you can feed off of. And we could talk about wall balls where you shaved off 2 minutes of time, but that's not really the story of the race. You did pick up significant time in some of the other stations. So sled pull was 20 seconds faster, and it's not like you had a weak sled pull before. In Nice, your sled pull was 346. If you listen to any commentary on the Nice race, those sleds were heavy. Like it was tough. So 346 was respectable. You had a 323 burpee broad jump. In Toronto, you improved that almost exactly 45 seconds. You did a 238. You picked up time in farmers carries. You picked up time in lunges. So it wasn't really just the wall balls. So I'm curious, like, what did you do differently, or did you focus on those things? Because knowing you, like you don't necessarily focus on everything. I mean, you do stay generally fit and generally ready, but like those are some pretty decent gains in some pretty hard stations that it's hard to optimize to. So I'm just curious, what did it look like over the summer for you to go from that Nice race to then being able to shave off some of that time fairly significantly in some of those stations in Toronto?
Yeah, so I kind of just have a goal or mindset for every single race. So I guess starting from the beginning, Chicago the first time was simply just like a time trial. I was just by myself in an open race, just out there trying to focus on my running times. And if I hit my running times exactly, I knew I'd run a good race because the weights weren't very heavy.
And trying to
Um,
catch two of your friends from a 10-minute later start time.
yes, that was motivation as well. The Milwaukee crowd was letting them know that I was catching them 10 minutes
And
behind.
he almost did. I think he actually got one of them. So
And then Houston was the exact same thing. Can I run the exact same pace for all of the runs with the heavier weights? I know the time is going to be relatively slower. A lot of times people say your first pro is 3 minutes slower than your open in general. I wanted to run essentially the exact same running time, and then whatever the stations were added on top of that. That was kind of my goal. But again, I was just focused on the runs. In Nice, now I had a pro under my belt. It was okay. Whatever I did in Toronto, I'm going to not only be faster on the runs, I'm going to be faster or equal every single station that I did. And with it being warm in Nice, I kind of got a little overcooked. All my runs were very fast. They were my fastest runs so far. And going
27:36 run time, 4:43 rock zone. So that would be 31:30, call it 32:15 of runtime, total runtime,
yeah,
which is
so
fast.
it was my fastest I had run so far, and it was just so hot, and I'm a really big sweater that on the wall balls I just completely fell apart. Couldn't even catch the ball, slipping through my hands multiple times. Tried to chalk it up, it just turned into slime. So that was kind of the downfall of that. But other than that, the race through the lunges was exactly what I wanted it to be. I was in anywhere from third to fifth place for most of the race. Overall, in my age group, I was in first to third place for most of the race. And then the last run and the wall balls. Actually, funny, Fabi, who just ran with Ronk, we came into the wall balls, I believe, in first and second place in our heat. And he had a 6-minute plus wall ball, and I had a 5:40 wall ball. So we were both some of the fastest runners on the day, but our wall balls were so bad that it cost us the race. So that was kind of when, after that happened in Nice, I never really wanted that to happen again. So my goal going into Toronto is I want to be as fast as I was in Nice, but I want it to feel like I did in Chicago when I ran that first time trial. I was done with the race, totally fine, walking around. Houston, I was on my hands and knees. Nice, I fell apart completely, was just on the wall balls, basically walked across the line. So I wanted to be able to have the same performance with just a totally better feeling. So if you actually look at the splits from my Toronto race to my Nice race, through lunges, I have almost the exact same time. But how I'm feeling during the race is totally different. The runs feel so much easier. My station work is better. Like you said, my burpees were 40 seconds faster. It was something that I worked on. It was those specific stations that I didn't perform very well in Nice. Those were the things that I can improve on the most. And I basically just wanted to be able to compete at that Nice level with just feeling much more relaxed. And that was the goal going into Toronto. Could have been in the first heat with everybody else, but Marcus and I were at least in the same heat, and him passing me, even though I had a 45 whatever second PR on the burpees, Marcus still passed me on the burpees, and that's when he made his move. And that was at least someone out in front of me that I could shoot for instead of just time trialing it. So that helped in that race as well.
Yeah, so I heard two things out of that. One, even for high level, elite level runners, sometimes holding back that can actually make a big difference in terms of how you race. For those listening, you look at his the rock zone actually from Nice and Toronto was within a second of each other. His rock zone in Nice was 4:43. His rock zone in Toronto is 4:44. But you actually ran a minute and 2 seconds, so 62 seconds slower in Toronto. But the trade-off there was that your total station time improved by 3:41. So he gave up a minute on the runs to effectively gain 2:40 of total time on his race. And again, like we could talk about the wall balls. But when I look at this, like that's not the full story. Like you would have had a PR and been under 60 even with the same exact wall ball time because of the time that you gained in the other stations. So the other thing I heard you say is that you and Fabi came in together. So does that mean at some point this year, Raw Dog is going to run an open and try to break that 52 time?
No, he currently is much faster than I am. So even in my peak running, yeah, I think we'd be pretty similar. So it's not even close. He's also much smaller than me, so he just has much lighter frame. Could just beat me in. I mean, it would be, I guess, fun to see what I could do in an open, but it's not anything that I have on my mind.
Yeah, Dawson's a big guy. What are you, 6'2", 6'3"?
6'3", like 205 right now.
Yeah, 6'3", 205, and he runs like the wind. It's annoying. It's annoying, but I get to train with him, so that piece is cool. Well, that's awesome, man. I asked Marcus the same question. You think you guys got a shot in the Elite 15 doubles? He was all humble about it.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of funny because we're so similar in body types. We're both bigger guys. I think he's either 6'3" or 6'4". He's got like a half an inch on me, maybe like 5 extra pounds. But we couldn't be more opposite competitors, even though we're very similar size and much larger than a lot of the high level guys. Is that he comes from a total like anaerobic explosion background, and I come from a total and CrossFit, and I come from a total runner trying to lift weights background. So even though we are both tall and larger, we're complete opposite athletes, which I think is honestly how you have to do doubles. If you have people who are too similar in a lot of the events, you can't really feed off one another. Where if I go out there and I just set the running pace for him, he's going to crush the station. So we can kind of feed off each other in that way, and also just hopefully, with our combined times that we have individually, that translates into doubles times.
And I know you're an analytics numbers guy. I often bounce ideas of my goals for my own races off of you to feel out what's possible. So I know you've thought about it. Are you willing to put it out there? What kind of time can we expect from the Milwaukee boys and in
So
a E15 doubles?
the funny you
I
asked
mean,
that, because as long
Benny
as they
Big
put us
Bucks
in the
has got a
first heat,
57, so you got to beat him.
well, it doesn't matter what our time is as long as we're top three. So we don't really care. But honestly, I because that's the fact, I haven't even really tried to calculate out what our potential times are.
So
We
I
need
mean, and that
to.
makes sense because it's a true race, not a time trial. But is that going to be your strategy? So, like as an example, let's just say there are 5 elite teams in that. Like you're going to kind of throw times out the door and just give it a go.
Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't matter. Obviously, we will have pace goals for the ergs and strategy on how we're going to attack each event. But a running goal, I mean, I'd assume that I'm going to be basically, we're going to decide on a pace that we think is smart. That'll be what we do for the first half of the race. And then depending on what happens in the race, we'll have to change that. So you can't really plan the whole race out when you have no idea what place you're going to be in at the time. With station work in doubles really doesn't make that much of a difference. Running is, I feel, much more important, where you can make up time and put times on teams. I feel like that will be our focus. But if we're in 5th place or if we're in 2nd place going into the farmer's carry, we're obviously going to do things differently in the last 3 stations.
Sure. That makes sense. All right, switching gears, moving away, because when I asked you to come on the podcast, you said that you had some ideas, you had some things that you wanted to talk about, specifically some things that you feel like might help Hyrox with some standardization, might help with, we're always talking about times, courses, and I know you've put a lot of thought into this. So I'm going to actually turn it over to you and just kind of let you kind of set the stage of kind of some things that you've been thinking about, and if any of the Hyrox people that matter are listening to this, some things that they might consider.
Yeah, so I guess just to follow up with my background, like I said, I in college ran track and cross country, which are two running sports, but two very different sports. I also am the race director for a local half marathon in Whitewater, Wisconsin. We actually just had it in September. And I've been the race director for 8 years. So I do have just kind of a background of, like event coordination, event management, but also we're a certified race and you can run our race and potentially qualify for the Boston Marathon with a qualifying time in the half marathon. So we are a legitimate course. We do kind of go through all of that and the certification and everything that comes with that. So just looking at Hyrox from kind of my personal background, I just thought of ways that I feel that the current setup could be improved. I guess just backstory even more is that, the whole thing in Hyrox is that every course is different. The way that we qualify at the elite level currently is based off of time, unless you were placed in an elite race last year. But also, not only the elite side, on the just standard open side, you also have people who want to come to a race that they can compare their two races, and similar to like RoxOpt that you guys had talked about, there's all these analytical tools that they're accounting for things that are, I guess, the inconsistencies between races, which, yes, that's good to point them out, but can we figure out a way to actually eliminate them so that we don't have to account for these things on a race to race basis, and we can just simply take times from one race to another and compare them. So kind of just going through, and I'm going to be looking down at my notes a lot, and I'm probably just going to be jumping around all over the place. But
Yeah, go for it.
talking about with my background, so like in track, when you're qualifying for, say, a national meet or at in D3, you have a time qualifier, and it's fine because race to race, if you're on an outdoor 400-meter track, you are always running the same track no matter what. The distances will always be the same. However, when you're on an indoor track, there are different size tracks. There's a 200-meter track. You can go to an oversized 300-meter track, and you can go on bank tracks. And they've calculated an exact conversion. So over like 5,000 meters on an indoor 200-meter track versus an indoor 200-meter bank track, you actually have to add 9 seconds-ish. I'm estimating here. But you add 9 seconds to your total time to convert it to a flat track. Now, that's just one variable that we're working with. We're working with just a flat track to a bank track. Oversized is very similar. I think it's a little less than banked. And basically, the whole reason behind it is you're running on a curve for less amount of times, which is harder to do. The more you're running on a straightaway, the faster your overall running time will be in general. So because there's a standardized track, you can do qualifications based off of time. It's perfectly relatable. So when you're qualifying for, say, a national meet, you can take the top 20 times in the country. Those people make it to nationals. Once you're at nationals, times don't matter. It's all about placing through prelims, semis, and finals. And then that determines the winner. In cross country, it's different, where every single course you go to is completely different amount of turns, different amount of straightaways. They say approximately 5 miles for a college cross country race. Well, I can tell you over my years of running cross country that you cannot compare times unless you're on the exact same course. There's other variables in cross country. You have weather that comes into effect, which can impact many things, just heat, wind overall. That's all going to affect your time. But in cross country, place is the only thing that matters. You could run your entire cross country season and not measure anything by time. You go to the regional meet, which is a group of, a smaller group of teams in your local area. You say the top 3 qualify for that. You go to sectionals, and then, and this is either, high school or college. Then you race at sectionals. The top 2 or 3 teams from that then go to state. Once you're at state, again, since it's all place based and team score based, time never factors into anything. So even though we have very different courses all over the place, different turns, slightly different distances, they don't need to be measured or certified that they are the exact distance because you're going off of place. Now, the same thing is with road racing. So with road racing, it's kind of a mix between the two. It's almost like track and cross country combined, because you're running a race that is not just one circle, it's a certain distance. The only difference is that you have to hire somebody to come out and be certified and to certify that this race is this exact distance and you can use this race to qualify for, say, other races. So in just the half marathon that we put on, we have to hire a company that comes out, and essentially how they do it, it's very weird. So they ride on a bike and they take the circumference of the bike wheel. You just imagine that it's somebody out there with, just one of those measuring wheels, but it's not like a meter long. They just measure how many circumferences of the bike wheel add up to the distance. So for a half marathon, it's probably like in the, thousands of revolutions of that bike wheel. To simplify it, we can just say that every wheel revolution is a meter. So what they do is they make the course backwards to front, because you can always change the start line. You can't always change the finish line. So you solidify this finish line, you ride the course backwards, and then you do it how a runner would run the course, which is very specific. So when you're taking turns, you're taking a turn at a speed that a runner would be coming at. So you're measuring that distance. It's kind of like, what do they call it? It's the path of least resistance. So it's like the fastest you could possibly take this turn at a normal running speed should be the distance that you're measuring. It's not going to be the edge of the road. It's not going to be the center of the road. It's going to be the tangent to every single turn. How quickly can I make it to this corner? And how can I take this angle as a runner would? That would be the shortest amount of distance. So that's how they're measuring a road race. They're not measuring it just by, GPS signal or by just the way the road is. It's how you actually run the course is what they're measuring. Because if it's the least path of resistance, that's the shortest possible distance that somebody could take these turns and run this race. And that's how you have to measure it. So every turn is very unique and every turn is different. So they're doing this multiple times. They don't just do it once and call it a day. So over these long races, they're out there for hours measuring these courses. And the way, like I said, the way you do it, you start from the end and you go to the beginning, and then you can make the starting point at any point. And there are still other variabilities that come into, an outdoor road race. Like I said, same with cross country, you have wind factor, you have weather factor, you have all of that. But at least you can say, all right, this course is not going to be the same as every other course, but we can safely say that because we have it certified, the distance at least is exactly what it needs to be to qualify you for these other races. So kind of taking those three different things, the track, the cross country aspect, and the road racing aspect, I thought that Hyrox could use specifically kind of like the road racing aspect, where they are having either an outside body or just a team within the Hyrox team that their specific goal is to go around and certify races. Now, I know when they're submitting information, different franchisees, when they're submitting race courses to Hyrox, they have to be approved. But what's on a piece of paper versus what is actually at a site is very different. So you would essentially hire, well, I guess first, before you even hire this team, Hyrox needs to come out and say, these are our exact criteria for each race. It needs to be total rock zone plus run this distance exactly. It needs to be, the way that the course is set up. You can just eliminate the events, just the running to and from each single station, because depending on where you are in the race and where it's located within the rock zone, if you have 20 ski ergs versus 40 ski ergs, well, you're going to run to the end a little further than you would normally. So they need to come up at least with a standardized distance that can either allow for 1 row or 2 rows of each, so that you can at least standardize the distance that you're running in each event. So I guess we've had this conversation that in Toronto, or just in certain locations, when the rowers are single file, you're actually running way further down before you have to run back before you even get to the rock zone. You're still technically in the rower station, so that's counting against your rower time. So in this situation, we can just eliminate those times, because each course setup is going to have slightly different. And if they want to standardize each event, they can standardize each event. I'm just talking about simply the run in the rock zone.
But not to interrupt your flow here, but I guess, what would your response be to them then? Because I feel like their response would be, well, we do measure the run plus the rock zone. It's 8.7 kilometers every time, but that doesn't make sense. I mean, I believe them that they believe that when they say it, but we can clearly see, just looking at data, that something is off. So what would your rebuttal to that be?
So my rebuttal to that would be, tell us how you're measuring the course. Like I mentioned in the road racing section, you're not measuring the course from the edge of the road. You're not measuring the course from the middle of the road. You're measuring the course as the path of least resistance, the tangent geometry of the fastest way you can turn every corner. So if a course is only left turns, it makes it a little easier, because you can measure essentially to the inside of where the barriers are, and that would be your fastest way. But if a course ever has a left turn and a right turn, are they measuring just the inside distance? Are they taking the tangent? Is it actually feasible to measure the tangent, because you have the fast course bowing out to the right more, and then the slower people are staying on the right side? So it's like, would you actually have to run through people to get out of the fast lane to actually take the shortest point? And so a lot of
you're saying more transparency to how it's actually being measured.
Yes. So just that,
and then having a standard way of doing it every time.
We need criteria of exactly how it's measured, how they're doing it, so that if there's transparency, a lot of this is cleared up. A lot of it is just right now people just, witch hunting and saying, well, it must be this, this, and this. But if they actually had solid data that would prove that they measured everything and everything matches up perfectly, that can eliminate at least the run course completely from just, I guess, people questioning it. And the whole thing that I started with is you essentially need to have like a governing body outside of Hyrox, or you just need to have somebody at Hyrox, main Hyrox, that goes out to the franchisees that make sure that they are measuring everything correctly. And another thing with it is that just in general, I mean, not that anybody's ever really comparing it, but if you have an elite race and a pro race on the same course, but the race setup is different, the distances are going to be different. So I don't think there's any way that you can have a start and a finish at the exact same spot at 2 different races on the same course and convince me that they're exactly the same, because that is very, very hard to do. So essentially, I don't think that the elite start should be at the same as the normal wave start. Because if you were to measure the course backwards and go, you'd be able to find the exact distance. But having that match up perfectly with all the different variables, I mean, we could also even bring in the path of least resistance and the fastest course within the rock zone as well. Because obviously the rock zone is very spacious. The wider a rock zone is, actually, I don't think they're measuring that horizontal movement that you're doing. they're only measuring, all right, what's the distance from the end or the in to the out or the out to the in, however you want to do it. When you're actually running those, the way the course setup is so different on every single one, you'd have to, measure actually how a person is running a race versus just approximating, gate to gate distances. If you wanted it to be exactly the same every single time, you'd have to, actually follow how the course is run versus just setting it up and measuring distances.
Okay, so I mean that makes sense. I hear you. So to kind of summarize that, basically the idea is when we're measuring road races, we have a standard way of doing it that we do for every road races. That's what allows us to qualify people for the Bostons, the New Yorks, the Big Six, soon to be the Big Seven with the announcement of Sydney. And you're suggesting that we effectively do the same thing for Hyrox, at least for the running. Any other thoughts that you have for them that might be helpful to
Yeah,
consider?
let me just kind of go over my notes here to think if I missed anything. I guess what's great for Hyrox is they can put the start anywhere. So you can have a course set up and they're able to move the start to wherever they want on the course because the first run is different. So it is beneficial in that way because the start is, wherever they put it, they can adjust it to make sure that it is the correct distance. Again, usually, I guess this isn't very cheap to do. In general, just when we recertify our course, just simply changing, there's construction on one road and we have to just adjust and go one road block over. It's still the exact same price because they have to do it. And it's like $500 each time to come out and certify this course. So this isn't like something, that's inexpensive for them to do, but it would, at least if you
But
have
that's paying a third party in this instance.
yes,
Hyrox would just be doing it themselves.
yes. And if they were to oversee it, but it is, that's another person they need to hire. I mean, we had talked about, somebody that hires them, that's hired by them, that sets up, all the elite races, or making sure that people who have had past performances that would justify them being in the first heat. So we're talking about like, they'd have to hire somebody for that. They'd have to hire somebody for this. This is just more people that they would have to hire and be in charge of. So it is a higher expense to them. But yeah, I mean, the main thing is that that they would have to come out with standards and guidelines because none of this can be done without a set list of everything that they has to be followed. And I've heard that they have like 3, just like cookie cutter courses that they're coming out with that they believe have been standardized that can fit into most general halls. But what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of these halls have pillars in them, and just simply changing the course from one pillar can significantly change the distance that you're running between events. Just like I talked about, where we have to go one block over in the road race, we have to get the entire thing recertified because for it to be to that said standard, it needs to be remeasured every time any change is made. So even if you have these cookie cutter courses and you put them in a facility that has pillars and there's slight adjustments that need to be made to the area, that's still distance that needs to be tracked. And overall, if they don't want to make everything exactly the correct distance, well, just like I talked about in track, when they have a bank versus a flat track and they automatically assign 9 seconds to it, assign a second decrease or increase to everybody's total time. Just have a standard process where, all right, this course is measured. It's ended up being 45 meters short. All right, you can average that would be for a person running a decent pace at an elite level, or if you wanted to do it for a standard level, as long as everybody gets the same one, you're at least taking that time difference off. So let's say 7 seconds off of everybody's time, but at least it shows,
which we know they can do because they did it in
yes,
Amsterdam. So.
Exactly. They can measure how long it takes somebody to do a burpee 2 meters 5 times or 4 times or whatever it is. They can approximate what it is to run 45 extra meters or 45 less meters. So those time adjustments could be an option for them. The only other thing I have, which is kind of a pivot, but not really, but I had talked about, wind having an effect on outside races, or specifically in track and field for the sprinting events and for things of anaerobic capacity that wind has a direct effect on sprints and jumps. You can get a benefit, or if you're running into a headwind, you can get, I guess not penalized, but you can run a slower time. So I kind of look at that as the sled push, wind aided and sled, I guess, tension, however, whatever the measurement is for pushing or pulling the sled. So, and I kind of would like to pick Anthony Parasini's mind on this, the engineering brain, but you can essentially, the weight of a sled does not matter. You can put it on any surface, you can put it on a carpet, you can put it on something, but the energy it requires to push and pull it to move it on that surface at that weight can be measured. So there are push and pull devices that can measure the exact tension or power that you need to move a sled. So you can measure, say, take an average of 10 carpets and 10 sleds in the push, have their average tension of the pull and their average push tension, and you set a standard to, it doesn't matter what weight is on the sled. Take your ideal situation that Hyrox wants to certify this at, and say, okay, at this weight on this carpet, we want it to be this tension. Well, you can make every single sled adjustable off of that, just based on how much more or less tension it takes to move that sled. So on a fast sled day, well, they can go out and measure, all right, how much force does it take to move this sled? How different is that from what our standard was set at? Is it one standard deviation away? Do they do it just based off of, a number thing? But so on a fast sled day, you can actually adjust times to what a normal sled at what their standard could be. And I know that this is, I mean, it's just an idea. But it would take out that fast sled versus slow sled. I mean, the lanes would still be different overall, but somebody who's pushing, we had looked at Camilla Massa in the women's field when she pushed a 130. Well, you can go out and measure what it took to push that sled. And if it's far below the standard, you can add time to their total time, just like we talked about with the running. It's just like, you have to look at it as, if you're pushing less weight the same distance, or it's easier to push it the same distance. We always joke about that with fast sleds, you're essentially skipping a station. Well, you are. It's like doing half the lunges. You're skipping half a station if the effort that it takes to move that sled for the same distance is far less. So you can add a time penalty, or if they're really hard sleds, a time gain to a standard rate that they want. And that can, and again, everybody in the race would get the same one. So in a race, it wouldn't matter, because again, in the race of who wins, time is irrelevant. But if you're trying to keep time as a standard, you can adjust based on the sled tension, and I don't know if I'm using the right physics word.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think, definitely for the elite races, it would be easy because, well, what would be easy would be just making sure all the lanes were the same. Because obviously, when it's an elite race, those are the only races going on. We now, there's separate races. We're clearing the course. With the age groups or people trying to qualify, it'd probably be a little bit more difficult, because as we know, they're running, heats all day long from 7:30 a.m. until 9 o'clock p.m. And they've got, excuse me, did not sleep last night with little PJ. They're running times all day long from 7:30 to 9 o'clock, and seemingly using volunteers. But I like that I like that idea. I think that is interesting and also productive and constructive. I feel like a lot of times when we have this conversation, the general we, not you and me, but we have the general we, when we have this conversation, it's just people complaining, oh, we need to fix this. But I think that those are two real world, tangible examples of how we could potentially bring some standardization to this race that they have even said they ultimately want standardized. So I love both those ideas.
Yeah, and if that's their end goal, I mean, obviously they're just growing the sport right now, but in interviews they've talked about, they want to be in the Olympics, or they want to, be a legitimate sport. Just having the time comparability from race to race should be as accurate as possible. So if you have to do these time adjustments, again, transparency is always better. You can give me the worst news in the world, but if you're transparent about it the entire time, I'll accept it. I'm in finance. I know how to spin things. As long as you word it right, you're good. Like if there's an unknown involved in anything, well, that's where you get all this backlash of, there's just so much uncertainty in how they're doing it, and if they're doing it correctly. But if they're transparent the entire time, it at least softens the blow if the blow is still there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, I think this has been awesome. I think that I enjoyed the the conversation and definitely enjoyed the ideas. Any final thoughts or shout outs that you want to give?
No, I mean, you're wearing a Bucks hat. I got a Spurs flag behind me. Um, we both support those two teams. But no,
Unfortunately, on both. Although right now it's like it's like a topsy turvy world. Normally, it's great to be a Bucks fan and not so great to be a Tottenham Hotspur fan. But right now, it's the inverse. The Bucks are bad, man. It's bad.
yeah, that's not great. But we have Hyrox to get through it, right? Just
That's
go
right.
destroy a workout.
So when's your next pro race? So you're doing Miami doubles with Marcus. When's the next time you're taking a crack at a solo pro?
Houston doubles with Marcus in
Oh,
March.
Houston. Okay.
And then yep, I have a wedding next weekend, so I can't do Chicago. So that kind of ruined my Hyrox schedule this year.
How dare
so
they?
I will be in Vegas February, not the elite race, just normal race. And then I'll be at Houston. And then depending on how that goes, Marcus has the ability, I think, to potentially get into an Elite 15 race solo. We have the potential to qualify in doubles. So if we do qualify in doubles, that may be my last race. But if there's, if one of us pops another good time and there we have potential to try to go for singles as well, that may shake things up. But for now, it's just Vegas, Houston, and then Chicago for Worlds.
Awesome. Well, like I said, if you want to follow him on Instagram, it's rawdogmills_II. Dawson, it was a pleasure, man. Really appreciate you joining. Appreciate your insights, and best of luck rest of the season.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Take care.